Welcome. I am Heidi Hill-Drum, and I am the CEO of the Tahoe Prosperity Center. We're hosting the first Tahoe Economic Summit, and I'm happy to welcome you on this beautiful fall day in beautiful Lake Tahoe. It's, kind of like planning a wedding. These one-day events I realized a few days ago, and it's just thrilling to see the whole room packed. So again, thank you all for being here. As we've said before, Lake Tahoe is made up of many communities, but we're one lake and one regional economy. So what affects some of us affects all of us. The Tahoe Prosperity Center is hosting this economic summit to catalyze change and action for the benefit of the regional economy. We want this event to be focused on the part of the three-legged stool that often gets forgotten, the economy. However, we also know that in order for Tahoe to thrive, we must keep each of the legs of that three-legged stool balanced, and those legs are the economy, the community, and the environment. So our mission is uniting Tahoe's communities to strengthen regional prosperity, or to use a lake analogy, to raise all boats. We may be a small organization, but we are efficient, and our internal slogan is getting stuff done. Or if you notice in the stickers in your bag, we maybe used a different S word, but you get the idea, getting stuff done. The role of the Tahoe Prosperity Center is to work in the space where no one else is working. We don't want to duplicate efforts that are already moving forward and working well. And we want to work on wicked messes. These are a few of the wicked messes that we're working on right now. Expanding cell phone coverage and broadband through our Connected Tahoe project. Adding the final 2 fire cameras to the Alert Tahoe system locally. We have 9 cameras in place already. We're down to the final 2. And those cameras are protecting our communities from wildfire. The recently completed Tahoe Workforce Ecosystem Report, and if you want to talk to the author, he's here today. I can introduce you, Michael Ward. And a key strategy from that report was that workforce housing is desperately needed in our community. So we look forward to leading a project in 2018 to build workforce housing. We also, yay, you can do thumbs up if you want. All of that's good. We also regularly update economic and community demographic data through our Measuring for Prosperity report. We had hoped to release the final 2017 Measuring for Prosperity report today at this economic summit, but we're still finishing some of the analysis in that report, and as they say, we want it done right, not rushed. But because you all bought tickets to be here today, I have a few statistics from that report that I'm going to share with you that no one else has. The Tahoe regional economy is $5.1 billion, and 62% of that is tourism. That's up from 42% in 2010. Annual lodging revenues and sales taxes have both increased steadily since 2010 and 2011, and the Tahoe Basin population has stabilized at around 54,000 residents. The past 2 years, we had a slight increase in population, which is good and hopefully a trend that continues. But more than half the jobs in our region are filled by people who live out of the area. And only 18% of our residents can afford the median home price in the Lake Tahoe Basin. So we clearly have some more work to do to diversify our economy, build housing for locals, and improve job opportunities. Fortunately, the Tahoe Prosperity Center is focused on these goals, and we hope that today your ideas in the different sessions are going to continue to help us move in the right direction. I briefly want to thank the Tahoe Prosperity Center Board of Directors, our staff, the Summit Planning Committee, and the volunteers who are an important part of making sure today is a success, as well as all the Hyatt staff who've been phenomenal to work with and are helping with all these last-minute changes. We know a one-day event will not solve all of Tahoe's problems, but we do know that the conversations that happen today will begin to do just that. So let's move towards action on these big, wicked messes and get stuff done. Now, before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to thank our premier sponsor, Advance. They're here at this front table, and they have a little table in the back if you want to find out more about their work. But briefly, they're a collaborative network of local organizations, government, and employers working together to support adults in meeting career, education, and other personal goals. Advance is a great example of workforce development that's really working in our community and taking residents from the lower end wage jobs into higher wage jobs. And so it's a really great model that we hope to see all around the region. So thank you, Advance. Our two other premier sponsors that we really appreciate are AT&T and US Bank. So let's give them a round of applause too. We do have lots of other sponsors. I'm going to thank them at lunch. But right now, what I would like to do is introduce our keynote speaker, Gino Borges. Gino is going to set the stage for many of the creative conversations I hope you have today. He is a partner and director of impact at Open Path Investments, and the Open Path team transforms ordinary apartment complexes into thriving communities via their Urban Village program. Gino speaks and teaches about impact investing, multifamily real estate, community wealth, and stewardship. He's given numerous talks, including most recently at TEDx University of Nevada. Gino's path led him from a California dairy farm to earn a PhD in communications from Purdue University, from Nevada Desert Quest to family ranch stewardship, and now from old school real estate investing to impact investing. Gino, thank you so much for being our keynote speaker today.
Thank you, Heidi, and I want to thank all of those who have been working with Heidi to pull off this event. It says a lot for anybody to pull off an inaugural event that has more than 150 people attending, especially when it's a concept and an idea that's just getting off the ground. A lot of hard work takes place in order to make these kinds of gatherings a reality, and a good friend of mine and mentor, Joel Solomon, who's one of the pioneers in impact investing and started one of the first impact investment funds called renewal funds, said that in the end, in terms of our legacy, one of the best things we can ever do, and that one of the things that we will always be remembered for, is how we helped people gather. And he says that, and I've also experienced it as well, is because there's a certain magic that happens when we come together under a particular intention. And it's with that magic in mind that I'm really grateful for being here today. I want to take a moment to illustrate what we're going to be exploring today during, not only later today, but during this speech, and this concept of what it means to have a particular need as a community member and a particular offering as a community member. So I want you to take a moment to imagine something you need right now that's occupying you. And I want you to feel into that need for a second. And imagine being isolated and not having that need met. Whether you have a housing need, a job need, or a particular communion need of some kind. Now take a moment to imagine what you have to offer the community. The community, either your organization, your family, your community. Imagine what you have to offer that currently isn't receiving an opportunity to be heard or addressed. Now I want you to take your neighbors and clasp your neighbors' hands for a second and hold each other's hands. There you go. Now I want you to take that original need that you're holding, that you have right now, that's occupying your mind and your heart. And just imagine what it feels like now all of a sudden to have that need addressed through the collective, through the community, through the hands that you are holding. And take the same feeling and now move your offering, what you have to share, and what it's like to now imagine and feel into what you're offering that you have held in your heart or in your mind, and you're able to share it with the community. Now you can release. When we think of building community through sharing, at its base, it's very simple, and yet such a forgotten concept. And that is we are sharing needs and offerings. At our best, we are sharing needs and offerings fluidly, in a flowing manner, without friction, without fear, without judgment. And I would be remiss if I didn't share what's on my heart right now. My life over the past 2 months has been radically altered, but also in a good way in terms of I had the opportunity to feel the community vitalized. I was being held. I was reaching out. My hands were reaching out in all directions, and people were just coming to clasp my hands, left and right. About 2 months ago, my mother, 73 years old, Darlene Borges, who I've never known as being a sick person, had complications that eventually led me to caretaking for her over the past 2 months. And in a peaceful and painless manner, she came home for hospice for a week on our family ranch, and with the family at her bedside on October 15th, she passed away. And I share this story with you because I've always felt that it's important to actually share what you're being occupied with. I wouldn't want to pretend that my headspace is anywhere else. But in reality, when I was talking with Heidi a couple weeks ago, right after my mom passed away, I realized that the theme of today is what I experienced in a raw, visceral, indelible way. People showed up to provide transportation, housing, preparing meals. Numerous professionals stepped in to provide a care that was this immense dignity that my mom and my family was able to experience. And it was through that sharing of humanity. It's not just on the material plane. Well, the things I mentioned were merely on the material plane, but the beauty of sharing is when sharing is done with the presence of love. When sharing is done with the presence of love, that's the best we can do as humanity. And I know everybody in this room is doing their own part to vitalize that potential here as well. And transition, in terms of sharing isn't anything new. I think it's sort of almost funny, but it is definitely forgotten. And there's two things I want to cover in terms of, it's very much a trademark of how we live in the world. We cannot live in isolation. That's the first thing that's new that we are confronting. Unfortunately, this country has a particular ideology that loves to talk about privatizing everything. And what comes along with this idea of radical independence is also collateral damage of not reaching out and not extending ourselves. And I want us to call into question a lot of what we're hearing, both in the public sphere and also the things that we've been raised with. To call into question the value or the limitations of independence, and to call in the virtues of interdependence. we will all thrive in an ecosystem where all the nodes in the network are activated. That's the first thing. The people in the room, all of you, and a large and a small part of culture is starting to feel how we've left all this unused capacity, both on the material plane, in our own heart and our own head. We've left it on the sidelines. And there's an immense amount of opportunity and potential that actually exists right before us through just merely redesigning how we live and how we are rearranging connections and opportunities. The other thing that's happened that shows up more in the world of the New York Times, in TechCrunch, and in Venture Talk, and also every time you turn on your computer or check your iPhone, and that is that we're living in an unprecedented time of innovation that is actually, in Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late, he actually articulates this very well. We're living in an era now where sharing used to be confined to time and space, right? My family had a dairy farm. If they needed a horse trailer, for instance, they would go to their neighbors to get the horse trailer to haul the cow to the pasture. But now, all of a sudden, we live in a world where innovation is overlaying the material realm, where all of a sudden you have access, we have access to the entire globe's material, emotional, and social resources. This is an epic time, in part because I'm not quite sure that our evolution knows how to actually manage this and address it. But it's also an epic time in terms of what's available to us is just getting started. So we see it in terms of Airbnb shows us that if somebody has an unused space in their house, how they can share that space. That's their offering to the community. If somebody has an unused space in their car with Lyft and Uber and the numerous ride sharings, that's their offering to the community. And your need is to go from point A to point B. And then beyond that is also just this extent to which these platforms that overlay the material realm also give everybody access to all the talent around the world. If you want a graphic designer, for good or for bad, you have everybody available to you, whether it's a Pakistani graduate of a tech institute. That person all of a sudden can do the work that your neighbor used to do. It's a much different world in terms of they're also sharing. That's what their offering is. So it raises the question, we're much more global citizens than ever in terms of this global economy. And what we're witnessing is this removal of boundaries across the board. From businesses to governments to nonprofits, what we're seeing is this immense disruption going on. And we're all a part of it. We're both complicit in it. We're both benefiting from it. But we also want to be conscious of what is happening in terms of the people that are actually being left behind. Because if we don't get this right, it's not going to be fair to everybody. It's not going to be fair at all. It's going to accelerate very rapidly. The tech platforms that are being overlaid on the globe of what we call Earth are going to accelerate the flow of goods and services. But unless we get it right in terms of fairness and equality and conduct ourselves in a meaningful way that we can all be proud of, it's only going to flow to a few of us. The emphasis will also be in an era where this sharing economy will slowly dissolve the boundaries of what you typically are comfortable with. This idea of cities, counties, and nation states is slowly going to unravel. The boundaries are going to be permeable, already are permeable. We are truly living in a collaborative economy, and it's only going to accelerate. In our own backyard in Tahoe, I live in Reno, in Carson City, Truckee, there's a vast pool of energy. This is a great place to live right now. I lived here after I graduated from Purdue in 2003 with my PhD. I moved back for a couple of years to the Reno area, and then I moved to the Bay Area for about 6-7 years, and then I moved back in 2011 to the Reno area. And there's an immense amount of activity, and more importantly, what's going on is that what's happening here is that more and more people want to live intentional lives that are here. And when you have a collective of people that want to live intentionally, coming together and sharing ideas, that's when a lot of magic starts happening. You know, but Tahoe is, obviously we know in terms of its natural beauty, but one of the things that always sticks out to me about Tahoe is that the whole Tahoe region reminds me of my inherent connection to you already. When you think about the natural beauty of Tahoe and all this water pouring into this big pool, it reminds me of just, I walked out there this morning before I came here. I walked out to the beach and took it all in, and there's just an amazing amount of chi and prana as you walk out, and it's just this sheer energy. It's almost impossible to feel heavier by just going out there and being present with this big body of water. And then when I imagine the Truckee River, I imagine it as like a meridian, right? Like a meridian in the body in an acupunctural way, where it just sort of flows and releases the energy down to all of us down in the Reno, Sparks area, and then eventually on to Pyramid. And it just has me thinking, what are we not, if not connected already by this body of water that's already here? So what am I asking you today to consider? So when I was speaking with Heidi, it seemed like 4 to 5 months ago about the direction of what I was going to share today, she made it clear. It's like, hey, let's challenge our assumptions. I agree. I love that idea. I want you to consider a couple things. I want you to consider more than talking about yourself in the context of I am John Doe working at XYZ doing XYZ. Just challenge that assumption and challenge your identity of challenge your identity of yourself in these conversations that will follow afterwards. Imagine yourself being more than representing a city, a county, or a jurisdiction, or a business, a specific business. But how is whatever you're involved in going to activate the nodes of the larger community? So if you're familiar with network theory, the power of a network is not so much in the individuals, but in the relationship. To the extent the relationship is vital, is the extent to which the ecosystem, the social and the cultural and the economic system is vital. It's not vital by us just all existing in our isolated entities. It's vital by engagement. It's vital by the depth of the connection between each other. And the larger thing, as I want to challenge you with, is this idea of how can we turn, with these boundaries being unraveled, with cities and counties and towns, how can we imagine this whole region, Tahoe being the inspiration, but how can we imagine this whole region, Reno, Tahoe, Carson City, the counties, the rural counties, how can we imagine it being a village? Can you imagine that? A village of 500,000 plus people all working together, activating all that unused potential that is nestled within every soul, not only in this room, but outside this room. So no longer do you live in Lake Tahoe. No longer do you live in Truckee. No longer do I live in Reno. But I live in a village of 500,000 people. And how do we get to this vision is what I'm here to share with you today. And for me to get there, I need to share a little bit about my background, because in large part, I'm fortunate enough to have a front seat view of what it means to help residents and citizens create a village. As Heidi mentioned, I am a partner and director of impact at Open Path Investments, but the more important part about that is not what I'm doing. The more important part is what we are doing at a very small scale in multifamily real estate to exhibit what's possible when you actually think in a village concept. So Open Path Investments is a social impact real estate company, and you're like, what's that, right? There aren't many of us, trust me. This whole concept is essentially turning the idea of owning real estate not just for profit's sake, but as a vehicle for social and environmental impact. It's a much different concept. And what makes us particularly unique is what we refer to as our Urban Village program. Our Urban Village program is a community building program that's based on a simple idea. That when you help people connect, and you get them together to share what I asked you to consider in terms of your needs and offerings, that's when a particular magic starts happening. That's when people start feeling connected. In a bit, I'll share a bit about those outcomes. Our focus is on helping residents gather and work based on their own organic initiatives of need. So we have communities in Phoenix, we have communities in Dallas, we have communities in Las Vegas, we have communities in Colorado, we have communities in Sacramento. And each community has a particular alchemy. Just like Tahoe has its alchemy, social alchemy, Truckee has its social alchemy. And what we've learned over time is that you want to honor the alchemy and work with the alchemy. As opposed to a strict top-down model, you're actually there facilitating and listening and taking more of an ethnographic approach than a bureaucratic top-down, I know what's best. Often we don't know what the needs of people are until we ask. We have a broad idea, we have a sense of what the idea is. But here's the next thing, is where are people willing to lead on their own? Because guys, there's 150 great souls in this room, but we're not all going to do all the heavy lifting. The key is to activate souls. And the key is to be facilitating residents who want to act on their needs and offerings. So when you have residents, for instance, in our sense, we'll have anywhere between 200 to 500 people living on 5 acres. Sometimes 1,000 people in some communities that are larger, living on 5 acres. And when we arrive after we acquire our apartment complex, nobody knows anybody. They share walls. They hear each other between the walls. I don't know if you've ever lived in an apartment complex. You probably did when you were a little younger. But remember hearing your neighbors? But you really didn't know your neighbors. So people are sharing walls, but what happens when actually people share lives? So that's the premise, is that we invite the people out from their doors to actually come into our gathering space, public spaces, and actually start sharing. That's all we're doing, is our team is listening. And from this, the outcomes are beautiful. People that used to wave to each other are now actually just are sharing time. People are now working in gardens who previously didn't have access to gardens or just simply have never worked in gardens before. Elders who once lived in isolation are now feeling hopeful that there's a sense of community, somebody overlooking, overhearing, giving them a sense of purpose and dignity. Single parents are now receiving help with their kids. Since 2012, we've had over 1,700 urban village activities within our community. Here's the crazy part about it. Up until last year, we were doing that with one person on our staff working full-time on Urban Village. Now we have 2. This is what I mean by being able to think today, how are you going to scale your impact by actually rethinking and redesigning and working with the energy that's already there. It's just bubbling. That's all we're doing. It's not all. It's heavy lifting in the sense that you have to be willing to do it. But that's how you get lots of people moving, is staying close to what I asked you when I first started today's keynote with. Stay close and trust that when people are able to articulate their needs and offerings in an authentic manner, that if you're there to usher and facilitate the flow and mentor them through those moments of inevitable friction that it takes to take an idea from A to X to full execution, whether it's somebody wants to start a babysitting sharing program, somebody wants to teach ESL classes, somebody wants to teach business development, you want to be with that energy. You want to be with the tailwind. But my role in Open Path didn't start this way, or I should say my role with Open Path is fulfilling, but my career didn't start this way. I began the world of finance just like most people who begin the world of finance, which is a very sleepy endeavor. And that involves a lot of spreadsheets and one-dimensionality and forgetting that humans are a part of allocating money. Trust me, this is a major cause for all of us. But that's for another speech. This idea, and I'll just begin with a little story that happened. When I was 24 years old, my first job was at a financial services firm where I was doing financial planning, and after about a month and a half, which also says about a month and a half, I found myself sort of falling asleep at my desk. And all of a sudden, it just kept getting worse. The naps kept getting longer, and I was like, okay, I'm Portuguese and Italian. I know this is, I sort of get a little leeway on this, but it was getting pretty aggressive, and eventually I was just completely uninspired. And I remember my boss, Joe Burks, a gentle soul from the Midwest, big man, broad shoulders. He comes and taps me on the shoulder during one of my naps and goes, Gino, I don't know if this is going to work. I go, I know, Mr. Burks, I don't think so either. But at 24, I didn't know what was next. I just knew that I had a quest in front of me to find what my purpose was. And that purpose took me to a decade-long journey into Eastern and Western philosophy. Took me a journey into expanding and exploring vast terrains of nature, lots of it in the back country of the Nevada. And then also finding out how much more beautiful life can be when you are attracted to intentional people. And from there, eventually, I started bumping into people who were intentional with money. And here I am today at 45 years old in the field of impact investing, but more than anything, hopefully a channel for all of us realizing our intention and living an intentional life, a conscious life around the choices that you're making and how they impact others. When we create a village that I'm asking you to imagine, there's a couple key ingredients that you would want to consider. One is familiarity. Unless people are familiar with each other, people must gather, for instance, like this. Until there's a familiarity in a three-dimensional way, not just in a one-dimensional way through an online presence, but there's a magic that happens when all of a sudden I can feel you, see you, and adjust to you in real time. That's the familiarity that we want to create as a community. That's where we need to be. Because it's there that we develop the real connections that actually become meaningful to people. And the next step is the one that always gives everybody a little wiggles, or everybody gets, some people get really excited about this. You know, in all my work in trying to share my own life, and also in my work at Open Path, I realized that there's this first level that we're all involved in, right? And the first level of a sharing economy is transactions of goods and services, the real sort of obvious ones. And there's a lot of work to do. But there's a second one that I want to call you out and confront you on. Because until we get this one right, the transactions and the services are all just going to just sort of putter around. And that is that what people inevitably remember is the experiences that they have while here. They will remember the things that they overcome and the difficulties that they overcome in the end. They will not remember the transaction on Craigslist or the Airbnb encounter until it becomes sort of a visceral encounter where they feel like it was an authentic experience that they had. And what do I mean by this? All of you in this room probably have some amount of authority over creating space and people looking up to you. I would encourage you to do this and challenge yourself. How are you creating an opportunity, an environment, a work environment, a community, and a neighborhood that makes people not only feel familiar to each other, but they can express themselves without judgment and feel authentic in the expression? For them to do that, folks, you're going to have to get comfortable with people able to express their vulnerabilities. Because, as we've seen in the public realm, that unless we address and give people the space and feel comfortable in addressing vulnerability, it's going to show up in ways that are nasty, that create friction, territory. It's going to accentuate the shadow that we all have within us that we're all working on. But once we are able to free ourselves from that, I've always said that, you know, I only get to know you really to the extent that I know what makes you vulnerable. I will never know your whole self. I will never know anybody as a whole being until I either create a moment or I get to hear really what makes you vulnerable. Because otherwise, what happens when people aren't able to feel heard and when they are feeling vulnerable, they clench down. It's a physiological response. It's a protective response, folks. So even with our good intentions, you may want to help somebody, but if somebody isn't prepared to be helped, which means that they're still doing work and they feel threatened, it's impossible to help them. When we get together, what we've realized, and this is related to the authenticity part, and for the work that you're doing, is that you want to trust the inherent. When you get people together, and it's very simple, you have a public space, like Heidi and her team created here. You need a public space for people to come together. And the second part is, and hopefully this happens today with all of you, is that you free yourself up from judging yourself and others as they're sharing their story. And most of us express our judgments non-verbally. So while you may not be saying something, your shoulders and your face and your frown might be saying something. So be aware of that. And to trust that what is being shared needs to be shared. I really do believe that the universe organizes us in a beautiful way as long as we stay in the flow and honor the flow of where people are at and speaking from needs and offerings. And then there's a momentum that starts happening. There's nothing more exciting. Just imagine, just think about those moments where you have something to share and you get to share it. And feel the breath of the inspiration that comes as a result of actually being able to get something off your heart or off your mind. The Latin basis for inspiration. We talk about inspiration all the time. I hear this term. But the Latin basis for inspiration is to give breath to the body. To give breath to the body. To when you actually feel an elevation, are you creating that in other people? Are you feeling it yourself? It's a felt thing and not something we're going to think our way to. There's a particular momentum that happens when all of a sudden you start creating this environment. Neighbors start inspiring neighbors. And here's the real kicker for all those that are in social services. There's an organization out of Oakland called Family Independence Initiative. And I just love their hypothesis and thesis. Jerry Brown, the governor of California, contacted the executive director of this organization and says, look, we're not doing squat for poverty in this state. Everything is really just perpetuating the same cycle. He goes, you guys seem to be having some success. He goes, what are you guys doing? So Jerry Brown invited him to the Capitol and says, you have my full ear. What are you doing? And he says, well, Governor Brown, it's not about more services. Not at all. In fact, you can scale back your services and save people a lot of time. It's more about whether people are connecting to other people who they know have overcome difficulties. Meaning that when we look around, never underestimate the power of mirroring your neighbor who you have seen go through the things that you're currently going through. So essentially what they're doing now is actually connecting people on a peer basis and then helping, and then the resources come to help them out once it becomes clear what they need. It's not a top-down thing in terms of delivering the services from abroad. It's actually going into the communities, finding out who the social influencers are, who people are looking up to, because that's who people are following. And that's who they're mentoring. And that's the connections they're trying to make. They're trying to open those doors to make sure that everybody has the type of access and the resources based on what people are actually doing. It's scary to think that actually people may know what they need the best. And then how do we create a system and an economy that actually supports their needs and offerings in real time through mentoring and facilitation? The sharing economy and building community continue to spell, it's one major theme for me. This is all about relationships. This is all about accentuating the relationships, not only with the community, but also yourself. And in closing, I want to circle back to the Lake Tahoe story in terms of it talked about being inherently connected. And that is that in alternative medicine, I'm almost getting ready to shake that word, in holistic medicine, in ACM and acupuncture, they often talk about the pressure points. A few minutes? Yeah, good. They always talk about the pressure points, and I don't know if you've done acupuncture, but essentially your body gets knotted up, right? From bad posture, from a particular gait that you really isn't supporting your natural flow. And all of a sudden, with a little pressure, they're able, when needles, they're actually working with these meridians. And I want you to think about where your stuck points are. For this to work, I'm going to ask you to go inward first. When you consider this, go where are your stuck points with yourself. And then what's preventing you from overcoming those? Second, in your immediate context, in your work environment, and I know that a lot of you are key players in whatever organization you are, and a lot of people look up to you. Where's your stuckiness, or your stickiness, your stuckiness? stuckiness or stickiness with the people that are closely related to you. And then third, with your community. And be honest with yourself and just challenge your assumptions about how you really see yourself. Stay close to how you actually feel versus how you're actually talking about yourself. Because how you're feeling is much more you than how you're talking about yourself. Much more. Once you move from here, then go out into the outer world. And ask yourself at that point what you have to do to make your offers for the community. And what do you hope to gain and contribute to this village concept of all of us being inherently connected? And remember that when you move out into the space as an influencer that you are, to really develop relationships that are built on trust, authenticity, and vulnerability. Because we will grow exponentially as a village. We will access all the unused capacity when we clear that field that holds us back, that energy field. It needs to be addressed honestly, and it needs to be addressed by all of us who can trust holding that container for all of us, including myself. You will see visible effects across the board. You will see businesses no longer just thinking about profit, but they'll be thinking about themselves as impact investments or impact businesses. You will see more impact investors coming here. You will see more money flowing into the region that's holding all of us responsible for not just making more money coming into the community about how to make more money, but what kind of impression are you making on the earth that we're living on, that we're responsible for stewarding? What type of impression are we making and living for in terms of the people that aren't as fortunate as all of us in this room? Let's be clear about discerning what kind of energy we're letting into our village, what kind of resources. Let's hold them accountable too. Because one intentional person's worth 100 unintentional people in terms of the value to the village. And the beauty of all this, while it will be felt abroad in the entire region, what I'm most excited about is generally the feeling that all this new change through the sharing economy and building community through it will occur not just for myself, not just for you who is in this room, but for all of us, all 500,000 people that share in this responsibility for living here in this area. So thank you.
So, yeah, stay up here to answer some questions. Does anybody have questions for Gino? There's a hand back here. Chris has a mic.
Hi.
Oh, wow.
How about this? Whoa. Thank you so much. I was really inspired by your discussion of these larger, what I would almost call co-housing communities. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of co-housing, and I'm really deep in this conversation at the moment. In fact, I hosted a potluck at our house in Glenshire in Truckee to do co-housing, and visited co-housing down in Nevada City and Grass Valley, where they have 30 households, and this idea that there's a tribe around 100 individuals, and it was really inspiring to see that you're able to scale that at a larger scale, and wondering if you have any comments about that because of the sociological question around how big a functioning tribe is.
Yeah. So I would say that there's actually tribes within tribes. Oh, gotcha. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's an interesting question because I know I've read some sort of going in the digital world, but Facebook has learned that people only really stay connected to about 80 to 100 people on a real meaningful way. See, the rest is sort of just sort of social fluff. And that number, in terms of my experience, in terms of what I've read as well, in terms of social psychology, for people to have not only their base needs met, but also their psychological, emotional needs, and to feel a real strong sense of community, it's usually between the 100 to 200 people. But we also don't live, so I can imagine like many tribes within, so the larger ecosystem. So like what you're doing in terms of the co-housing project at 100 people is, I mean, it's like right in the heart of the sweet spot. So think of community as a continuum of connection. Obviously, we're not going to know everybody just because we have a limited amount of time and space. We're going to know some people really well. But it's really basically I guess I'm just speaking for myself, but how do you take that, you spend the bulk of your time with the immediate people, and then how is that inspiring you to go out and create other pods and other tribes as well? Because essentially, no tribe lives and exists exclusively. And in terms of OpenPath and being able to take that scalability to different places, I give a lot of credit to just our team's willingness to stay open to seeing it as a social experiment, an ongoing social experiment. It started in 2008. The founder of OpenPath is here. Peter Slough, maybe raise your hand so everybody knows you. Okay. He started this in 2008, and it continues to be a social experiment. But the special sauce is just being honest that bringing your intention to a space and really trusting people to come and gather and share their needs and offerings, and then start facilitating and mentoring and providing the resources and money to actually support those initiatives I see at that time. And what happens in Portland and the community in Portland is going to be different than the community in Las Vegas. And it's important to honor that alchemy.
Other questions? Raise your hands and we'll bring you a microphone. Oh, come on. There's there, Leanne.
Really appreciated your talk. One of the things that is sort of coming through is a form of leadership that you're talking about that's fairly radically different than the sort of leadership that is traditionally taught, which is from a top down. Is it your belief that we have to sort of change the various leadership programs that perhaps many of us have gone through? Is it a new class that's inserted in a long line of programs, or is it just a fundamental rethinking about what it means to be a leader today?
Yeah, I actually left, I left academia for a reason, and it's because it leads with the head, and it leads to shaping the human soul to careerism as opposed to potentialism. And so I'm much more inspired and moved to exist in the world and to connect with people and also see their spirit based on where they're at in their own life, and to cultivate that starting from what's here and then building out. So yes, I'm very unmoved by any leadership program that is based on a template that begins with the outer world and then just sort of superimposes the soul in a cookie cutter way into that model. I think those programs are not designed for today's economy. The realization is that we are moving much more to the feminization of an economy. So until we understand what those values are inward values. Those values are based on listening. Those values are based on vulnerability. And then because nobody does anything if they're fearful and feeling stuck, and no matter how much you try to help them. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in other people's life. When all of a sudden I'm constantly clearing, that's when I become a gift for the community. That's when we all become a gift for the community. And then when we help other people do that, that's when their gifts start arising as well. So until any leadership program actually addresses where we're at in 2017, yeah, it just sort of, it just feels a little numb. There was a question over here, right? I also want to thank, I think it's genius, Heidi, I really want to congratulate you and your group for inviting the high schoolers. Are you guys in high school or college? High school, good deal. Thanks so much for being here. I really do believe in multi-generational responses to life. And so I hope you guys are able to be heard as well and also feel comfortable speaking up to what's happening in your life. Because I don't understand everything that's happening in your life, and until we hear it, we won't know. Yeah. There was a question here. Yes.
I guess my question builds on his question. I'm kind of curious how the process is initiated, because you talked about it not wanting to be too top-down, but presumably there has to be some kind of top-down initiation. So how you kind of transition from the top-down, bottom-up.
Sure. Yeah, so there's two key ingredients. One is that you need a space for people to gather. Two, you have a team that goes into the new community and explains that there is a new intention for the community that wasn't present before. And then what does that look like? And from there, the Urban Village team works directly with residents in a very casual, social way for the first 3 to 6 months, in large part. It usually takes us about 12 months before it starts getting that traction where people start taking the initiative and where we know who wants to be the facilitators for a community. And then we have one position called the resident ambassador, who takes a much more indelible and a role in the community and actually functions as a liaison between our Urban Village team and AAC and the community. So we have that intention going in. It's the details that get fleshed out by actually being present in real time with the residents who've never experienced this pretty much their entire residential life. Because we're in what's called Class B housing, which isn't, so Class A housing would be, just really quickly, Class A housing is going to be a lot of new construction. Rent's going to be $2,000 plus a rent, or $2,000 a month plus. Whereas where we are in workforce housing, a lot of our residents are going to be apartment dwellers for life. So they've seen and they've felt the anonymity and the impersonal qualities of how 40 million, I think roughly 40 million people now live in apartment units, in terms of large apartment units. And so when all of a sudden we come, there's also there's excitement, and then there's sort of an awkwardness about, well, we've never seen this before. And so it takes us a little time to sort of get over that hurdle and to have faith in it, and knowing that we've done it numerous times. When Peter started out with just one community, heck, he didn't know how it was going to go. He didn't know. In fact, Peter always likes to share, Peter, the founder of Open Path, he always likes to share that our property management firm says you're going to get mutiny if you give them voice. It's like, you don't want to give them any power. So we actually got talked out of it, but he's like, hey, I was like, what can we lose? This is 2008. We're on the verge of an apocalypse here. So let's give humanity a chance. And so with his faith and courage in residents and in humanity being able to sort of steer itself, that's how it sort of grew. And then we've been able to replicate it, tweak it, and it's still being tweaked. Yeah, and I mean, that's what makes it fun, because I think if it ever felt like a real clear template, then I think we'd be missing a lot of stuff that, I addressed today. Yeah.
Can you guys give Gino a round of applause, please? Thanks. Thank you, Gino.
Thank you.